attending our webinar today to listen to our incredible expert panelists in the changing media landscape in Asia. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all dialing in from today. For me, there is voluntary people of the Korean nations and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community. I pay respect to elders past and present, and to all First Nations people whose land we will be dealing in today in this webinar. I would like to invite you all to submit questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box, and they will be answered at the end of the sessions. Please note that we will most likely not have time to answer all of the questions, but we will reach out to you individuals afterward to respond. Our moderator today is Dr. Greenlees, a senior advisor to Asialink and a former journalist who has spent the past 25 years working in Asia. Don is joining us today with three incredible experts who has extensive experience working in the field. I will hand over to you, Don.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and welcome to our three speakers. We have quite a geographical reach today. We have speakers coming from Germany, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and I'll be moderating this discussion from Bangkok, as well as an audience coming in from Australia in the region. Firstly, Glenda Gloria is with us. Glenda is executive editor of the news site Rappler in the Philippines, which she co-founded with three others, including Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa. And prior to setting up Rappler about a decade ago, Glenda worked in television news in the Philippines. We have Bai Lee, Asia Program Coordinator for the Committee to Protect Journalists. She's a veteran regional correspondent for international and Asian media, including wire services like Reuters and Malaysia Kini, which in itself is a trailblazer in regional digital media. And of course, then Keith Richburg, former Washington Post regional correspondent, who served 3 times in Asia, in Southeast Asia and China as bureau chief. And he is now director of the Journalism and Media Studies Center at the University of Hong Kong and a Washington Post correspondent. And of course, finally, thanks very much to our audience for logging in. We did have a few gremlins in the system, and I hope that didn't cause people too much disruption with log-on access, but thank you for your patience. This discussion could be focused on just about anywhere in the world. The issues we're talking about today, in many respects, are quite generic issues, but arguably the media landscape in Asia is worthy of special attention, given the distinct problems and challenges it faces. Asia is an especially dangerous place to be in the media, whether the threat is in the form of government controls, criminal liabilities, politically motivated detention, or even physical intimidation. I was just looking earlier on today at the UNESCO Observatory of Killed Journalists, which shows that the Asia Pacific to be among the most deadly places to work for media workers. Over the past 3 decades, the only region with a higher death toll for media workers was the Middle East. And we shouldn't forget that the worst massacre of media workers in history occurred at Maguindanao in the Philippines in 2009, when 32 of our colleagues were killed. That, of course, is at the extreme end of risks, but media workers face a wide range of harassment and obstruction and legal risk on an almost daily basis, as our 3 speakers today know from first-hand experience, and I'm sure they'll talk about that in due course. But interestingly, the perils facing the media are not just about individuals. They relate to the viability of media products and companies themselves. technology has left the media environment barely recognizable from the one in which people like me started our careers. We face both disruption and opportunity in the digital media age. And those opportunities, both in terms of disruption and opportunities, they're immense. Technology enables communication. Crucially, it makes it cheaper, faster, more portable. And gone are the days of journalists in far-flung places having to send telexes that would take a day to get to head office. That revolution in communications has been a godsend for working journalists. But technology is also a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it potentially democratizes the means of sharing information, but it also empowers authoritarian and illiberal governments. It's increasingly used as a tool for control and the production of misleading and potentially harmful narratives. And then the technology can drive form and content. Platforms like TikTok can reduce complex stories to bite-sized bits of entertainment, or worse, simply propaganda falsehoods. But I've been hearing it's all the rage now among newsroom managers who seem to be more interested in judging success by the number of clicks than the quality of the content. Yet the experience of the pandemic and the array of other global challenges we face, many of them acute problems in our immediate region, disruption at the strategic level, also at the environmental level, suggests that this is a time when we really need a strong media, and particularly in this region. Asia is experiencing the resurgence of non-democratic and illiberal patterns of rule. Freedom House in 2022 found that out of 28 countries, only 5 were judged to be full democracies. Meanwhile, there's a sense that the media's own ability to provide accountability has diminished as well, quite apart from the harsher legal regimes that journalists experience. Organisations like the Reuters Institute produced their digital news report in 2022 showing the trust of audiences has declined. On average, fewer than 4 in 10 people in the Asia-Pacific market surveyed say they trusted most news most of the time. That's a huge trust gap. In Korea and Taiwan, it's down to 30% and 27% respectively. Restoring trust is one of the big challenges facing the media globally. Obviously, traditional print and broadcast have that problem, but so do new digital media. In many respects, sadly, journalists are still seen as used car salesmen. Added to that, we're now facing another wave of technological disruption with the emergence of AI. Everybody's debating this and there are no clear answers. I read a heap of magazine articles lately, Economist covers and whatever. Nobody seems to have any definitive answers, but they all agree that huge change is coming. And the media will ignore these trends at its own peril. AI's impact on the media looks like of being a scale much bigger than any technological advance witnessed by the industry to date. It opens the way to media redundancies and a world of deep fakes, a new level of sophistication for those who trade in misinformation. It might further splinter the media market and sap advertising budgets on which many media companies rely to fund journalism. Moreover, in the near future, journalists will face a bigger challenge in ascertaining the facts, and verifying them to the satisfaction of audiences will be a huge enterprise. So look, that's a lot to get through in the course of an hour, but let's give it a shot. And we've got 3 great people to discuss the issues. I'd like, first of all, to go around the group and get a sense of the current regulatory legal space in the region for the media, what the broad picture is in Asia. And if I can start with Lee, because she monitors this on a pretty much daily basis. through the Committee to Protect Journalists. Lee, do you see any broad trends as a result of strengthening authoritarianism, illiberal regimes in the region?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Whenever people ask me that questions about do you see a broad trend in Asia, I always say that's a very easy question to answer because Asia only accounts for 2/3 of the world populations with just very diverse sort of political systems, very diverse sort of cultures and languages. But if I were to put if I were to try, to put it in a sort of broad sense, is that we do see a common trend in Asia with the sort of decline of press freedom in the regions. And I will try to break it down to 3 sort of main trends on what is driving up this phenomenon, and Don, you have captured some of that in your opening remarks as well as the kind of impact from regulations as well as tech. But if I were to try, is that we're seeing first the criminalizations of journalism, which creates a chilling effect overall. Last year we saw a record-breaking number of journalists being put in jail for their work. Globally, we saw 363 journalists in jail, 20% higher than the number we had from the year before. And Asia make up the largest number of that share.
I want to come to the jail journalists in a moment, Lee, but from a purely regulatory legal stance, do you see that environment being significantly tightened up across the board in Asia?
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing increased weaponizations of the law. We see journalists being targeted using an increasingly wide range of laws, not just the traditional sort of defamations or media law, but increasingly national security, financial charges. I'm sure Glenda can talk about this later, but fraud and even terrorism. And the use of this type of lawfare is increasingly common tactic in the authoritarian playbook. The law that that are meant to help journalists, for instance, fake news, or have also been weaponized to against journalists, and this, of course, have the sort of effect to silence journalists and attack their reputations. And the other trend that I would like to draw your attention to as well is the tag, as you say, tag as a double-edged sword. I used to work for Malaysia Kini, as you say, which 20 years ago, it really helps open up the sort of space in Malaysia, and help journalists to have. Give them a platform for independent reporting, but and in Asia, of course, tag is very relevant because we all of us in Asia love our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. But tag can be both transformative and destructive in the context of press freedom. It has given many journalists, where they have been traditionally tied censorship a platform, but it's also now used to facilitate those attacks on press freedoms.
Now, if we can go from the very broad to some of the more specific, and I'd like to bring Glenda in here on this question, just looking at the case of the Philippines. In the past, it's been known as having a fairly vibrant media. It's had historically a vibrant media, but it has actually been drifting down the tables for media freedom over a long period of time, and I think that particularly happened during the presidency of Duterte. As an editor, what challenges do you see on a daily basis in your operating environment? Do you feel that you're constantly sort of dodging around legal restraints that could get you into hot water and even put the business out of operation? You could be, some of the penalties you've faced in other cases being quite severe can put you out of business.
Yes, thanks, Don. Well, as we speak, Rappler is facing 3 major legal cases. One of which is the biggest one, which really is in relation to a closure order that was issued against us in 2018 under the Duterte years. There's a lot of uncertainty that remains pending in court, but I think what really has made the Duterte years of the last 6 years unique to as far as the Philippine situation is concerned is the fact that there were multiple legal and state attacks against media that were deployed simultaneously, which is first, as Lee has mentioned, weaponization of the law, using existing laws and new laws, for example, the cyber libel crime law against journalists. Second is really mobilizing the state against media companies. In the case of Rappler, the Securities and Exchange Commission, for the first time in its history, intervened in a case involving media, which is issuing a closure order against us in 2018. The third, which is a bit more complex, but at the same time expected given the system in the Philippine media, is really the buyout by cronies and associates of the ruling power of media companies and the use of regulatory power to end a franchise, in particular the franchise of ABS-CBN, which up to its closure was the biggest TV and radio network in the Philippines. So the last 6 years have been hell for media under Duterte, largely because of all that, mobilizing the state, weaponizing the law, but most dramatically deploying disinformation army to attack the reputation of journalists.
And it is getting marginally better. I think you suggested to me under Marcos, right? Ironically.
Probably better is not the word. We are in purgatory from hell. So the Duterte years is really the bottom of the pit, right? So the environment now is not better, only that there's some breathing space because the language of the president is critical to any society. Duterte every day would hit the media, would hit his opponents. This new president, ironically, Marcos 2.0, has the language of diplomacy, putting the Philippines under his rule, the best foot forward as much as he can. And it's a different kind of environment that is shaping because language sometimes speaks a lot when it's coming from the president.
Now, as sort of part of this little survey, I'd like to get Keith's perspective on all of this. Keith, you've been through Hong Kong through the darkest days of lockdowns and pandemic, and in the background playing out against that was the security crackdown. It sounds like a pretty awful time to have been in Hong Kong, but and it used to have one of the freest medias in the region, if not the freest. What implications has the security law and the security crackdown had for the local media?
Yeah, thanks for that, Don. Really interesting listening to the other two speakers as well. Look, obviously here, the imposition of this national security law, this draconian national security law, which actually is more like an internal security law because it's actually aimed at suppressing dissent within the country. It has nothing to do with anything outside, but they like to call it a national security law because they like to pretend that every threat coming towards Hong Kong and China is somehow foreign directed. But what they're doing is using it to crush dissent within Hong Kong. I was based in Hong Kong as a correspondent in the 1990s, and it was probably the freest press in Asia, perhaps with the exception of the Philippines. It was a very open, free, rambunctious press. People were, you had a lot of titles out there. People were asking everything. Today, no place has fallen further in the Reporters Without Borders ranking of countries and territories. No place has fallen further than Hong Kong. It's gone down to 140. Out of 168 or 70 countries and territories surveyed, 140, that puts it below the Philippines, which is at 132, puts it below Thailand, below Singapore, below else. This is one of the freest places around. What has happened in the last couple of years? Well, with this national security law, We've seen the shutdown of the most popular newspaper, Apple Daily. We saw the shutdown of Stand News. The top editors are on trial. The publisher, Jimmy Lai of Apple Daily, is still on trial, even though the place has been shut down since 2021. And we're now in 2023, and the trial has been delayed until September. Justice delayed is justice denied, by the way. Stand News editors are on trial. They're on trial for just things that they wrote and published on Stand News before it was shut down by the government. And then, and beyond that, Citizen News voluntarily shut down, in the face of these challenges. What does the national security law do? It lays out 4 very broad crimes: sedition, subverting state power; secession, which is trying to split Hong Kong away; collusion with foreign forces, and nobody knows kind of what that is. The problem is these things are interpreted so broadly that they can mean almost anything. And the interpretation of these laws seem to be up to the police. They seem to be able to arrest anybody for almost anything and put it into one of these categories. And what that has said, they like to tell you, oh, the law is very clear. The law is not very clear. The law is very vague. They don't explain kind of what does secession mean. We know what that means. It means independence kind of thing. But what about if someone is a journalist and they interview someone who advocates that position? Or they write a story that vaguely references that. They haven't talked about, and this is where the Stand News issue comes into effect, opinion pieces. Are opinion writers free to talk about a wide range of issues, or are certain topics off limits? They won't tell you, and they don't want to specify it because they want everybody to be cowed. They want everybody to be afraid. And what you're seeing now is because people don't know where the red lines are, they're starting to actually self-censor more and trying to figure out what is allowable, what's not allowable, et cetera. And again, it affects the local Cantonese language media in Hong Kong more than it affects the foreign media in Hong Kong, but people are still getting.
I'll come to the foreign media in a moment, but you're just talking about the charges being leveled at people like Jimmy Lai. You get a distinct sense that Hong Kong, which once proudly boasts as having a transparent and fair judicial system, and I'd reported on it a bit years ago living there, it looks like being charged is enough now. I mean, being charged almost guarantees a conviction. Is that the sense?
There is a sense here that the legal system has been weaponized against the media in these national security cases, because what has happened now is it's the chief executive who can pick the judges for the case from a list of approved kind of national security judges. They've also just ruled that you can't actually have the lawyer you want. They have a tradition in this place, which is a common law jurisdiction, of having foreign lawyers. They've now said in Jimmy Lai's case, he can't have a foreign lawyer. And also a lot of local lawyers might be afraid to take a national security case. Now, there have been some victories. The journalist Bao Choi, working for RTHK, was fined for doing something that journalists normally would do, which is go into vehicle records. So she was fined for this because that was considered a crime. But it went up to the Court of Final Appeals, who said, no. Journalists have a reason to look at transportation records and see who owns what vehicles. There was a photographer, a freelance photographer, who was arrested during the protest because they claimed that he was blocking the path of someone who was beaten up by protesters. He said, no, I was just trying to take photographs. I wasn't involved in it. And again, he was acquitted by the court. So in the regular courts, yes, you do see some people, media members, winning some small victories here. But again, in the national security cases, I think at the moment so far, everything is kind of on the side of the prosecutors, and there's no, under national security law, there's no presumption of bail. That's why you've ended up with people locked up for a long time with no presumption of bail, which you should normally get in common law. So the effect is really kind of what we call this chilling effect over the media in Hong Kong now. It's really, people are still trying to figure it out. And again, these kind of restrictions have existed on the media in China for a long time. The difference is in China, they've been dealing with this for decades. So they kind of know where the red lines are. They know how to get around the system and how to report things. It's all brand new in Hong Kong. You're going from a place that used to be incredibly free and open in terms of the media to this new draconian national security law. And journalists are still trying to figure out how to adapt to this.
Is there a sense that it won't be long before national law applies to Hong Kong?
National security law, you mean?
Well, you know, the treatment of the media in Hong Kong will fall under the same, you know, regulatory umbrella as the way the media is treated in China.
I think that's the whole point. I mean, you know, if you actually read the national security law, and it's actually not very long, you can read an English version of it. Part of it says the purpose of the law is to, in their words, not mine, increase the supervision of the media, including the foreign media. So in their sense, the media was out of control here. The foreign media is out of control. Journalism schools and universities were out of control. The whole purpose of the national security law is to bring Hong Kong to heel, to make Hong Kong be more like a mainland Chinese city and less like it used to be, which is an open kind of freewheeling place with people like me able to talk to you in this webinar.
So this is a good segue, Keith, into my next question for Leah. And she, as I understand it, has some quite good data, which you alluded to a little bit earlier, Lee, relating to the number of journalists in detention across the region. And when we discussed this the other day, I was quite shocked at the numbers. Perhaps you can give me a rundown of where things stand in terms of journalists in detention across Asia.
Yeah, well, the detentions of journalists across Asia is really grim. As I say just now, Asia makes up the highest share of imprisoned journalists worldwide. Out of 363 journalists who are jailed globally, 119 are in Asia. And Asia has consistently, had consistently been the region with the highest number of jail journalists, and many of these journalists are in China. We saw 43 of them at the end of last year and imprisoned in China. A number of them are in Hong Kong, of course, as Keith mentioned, the impact of the national security law since it came into effect 2 years ago. It really has a very dramatic impact on the journalism in Hong Kong, not just on the closure, not just news outlets have been shut, but also journalists have been put in jail, including Jimmy Lai, who faces potential life imprisonment. Apart from China, we also saw Myanmar and Vietnam, followed by a number of journalists in India and Afghanistan at the end of last year.
What about the Pakistan case? You mentioned the Pakistan case the other day as well, where I think some people face the potential for the death penalty. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, exactly. The Pakistan case was a bit separate. It's not part of the prison census that we captured last year. The Pakistan case that you referred to was, since late May, there have been a crackdown in Pakistan following the arrest of the ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan, and a number of journalists have been investigated, arrested. One of them are still missing for more than a month right now. And the journalists who are facing the potential death penalty are being investigated for terrorism because of their social media posts. So that goes back to the sort of tag as a double-edged sword point that you made at the opening. But in terms of jail journalists in Asia, we saw that the three worst jailers have been China, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Like China and Vietnam are states that have, traditionally have very little tolerance for independent journalism. In Myanmar, there have been a spike in the detentions of journalists because of the coup 2 years ago. So many of these journalists, cover issues like politics, corruptions, but increasingly we're also seeing journalists who cover issues like environment, climate change, and issues about the minorities have been targeted.
So what are the acts that in the case of the Pakistani journalists that seem to warrant the death penalty? How egregious were their offences?
Well, yeah, we definitely, call on the Pakistan authorities to drop the charges. The journalists have been targeted because of their social media posts that they shared about what's going on the day the ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan was arrested. And they share on their social media about what's going on. And then there was a complaint lodged against them for saying that they were inciting the public and as a result of that, they are facing the terrorism investigations, which the maximum penalty is a death sentence. But of course, this 4 journalists, they are based overseas right now. So they are not in Pakistan at the moment.
Now, for Gloria, this is a subject that's sort of fairly close to home for you at Rappler, because Rappler faces a number of court cases, including the prospect, to quote Maria Ressa, going on stating this publicly, that she faces still, did she say decades? Certainly many years behind bars. Perhaps within the bounds of what you are able to discuss, given that there are ongoing legal matters, maybe you could give us a sense of where Rappler stands legally. And I suppose a sort of basic question for you as a co-founder with Maria of Rappler, given all of these pressures and threats, is it worth it?
Oh, it's very much worth it, John. As Keith would know, the Philippines really takes pride in its history of activism and journalism. Many people forget that the Philippine media was a fuel to 2 people power revolutions that ousted corrupt regimes. I think a large chunk of Philippine media remains to be romantic about the idea of journalism and what it can do to serve public interest. But on the other hand, it can be said, and it has to be admitted, that the various legal cases and attacks against not just Rappler, but against critical reporting and critical newsrooms in media have really impacted the way we work, the way we plan, and how we grow the business. And I think that has severe impact, especially, for example, in the case of Rappler, because while the closure case remains pending with the Court of Appeals, the fact that it's pending and it's unsettled is the sort of this every day, every single day. The impact of that in the last 6 years goes to the extent of hiring. How do you attract people to a company that faces closure every single day? The impact of that also is on access to information, and especially in the climate of fear under Duterte, when people, and I go back to the cases of like parents of journalism students wanting to join Rappler, advising their kids to say, don't join a company that will be shut down anyway. The reason that we have survived, I think I cite 2. One is really the global support of the international community. Our colleagues like you, like Kids Institute, everyone who has supported us publicly from all over the world. Second, I think it's a solid community of readers in the Philippines who first value the role of independent reporting, and second, who will risk supporting media. And it becomes worth it because of that community. However small it is, it's probably not small, it's not big, but it has a voice in the public sphere. And the cases now, as I've said earlier, really pertains to 2. The one refers to our company, which is the closure order that's pending in court. And the second is the cyber libel conviction of Maria and our former researcher, Ray Santos. That is on appeal in the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court. We hope for a verdict this year because we need closure. And we're very confident that given due process and the rule of law, Maria and Ray did not deserve to be charged in the first place. And Rappler is fully Filipino-owned, contrary to the government claim that we're foreign-owned. And we're very confident that
you're looking for closure this year, but just on a brief personal note, this must be tremendously anxiety-inducing and stressful. How are you and Maria personally holding up? How's Maria holding up? She's a very strong person, I've noticed over the years, but it would ground anybody down, wouldn't it?
It's been tough. You know, we tease each other that we have PTSD. It's not a joke. We really
No.
have PTSD. There was a time, and I would share this anecdote, that we would do a weekly drill of a shutdown. So our lawyers would pretend to be agents from the state to close the Rappler offices. And then we will pretend, to shut down our laptops, call up our lawyers. And there was this drill that we practiced. But because the Rappler team has been so used to practice that they put it live on Facebook. They forgot that it's just practice. So the lawyers come in barging, and we were pretending to be, in panic mode. And one of our young kids put it live on Facebook, and every single media company deployed all their crew to come to Rappler. So there's that. We still do drills like that. And what's the effect of that on journalism? Right? I mean, the time that you should be spending doing stories, exposing corruption, inspiring people through good stories as well, is spent, like all of us founders for the last 6 years had to focus on both the legal counteroffensive, but also security. Because there was a time under Duterte that the trolls came to our office on Facebook Live and agitating the Facebook community to burn the Rappler offices. And now that I'm talking about it, it's like it gives me goosebumps, because I hope that period is over. Ironically, Kit here would know we are under a second Marcos. Ironically, we're able to breathe. We have breathing space. There is no president who chastises media every day. There is no president who comes out with a drug list every day. There is no president who tells us, I will kill you tomorrow. But then again, that shouldn't make us complacent.
Okay, this is a good point, I think, to come back to Keith. And Keith had mentioned earlier on the chilling effect that the closure of Apple Daily and Stan News and Citizen News has sort of had in Hong Kong. But it's not all bad news in a way in Hong Kong, as I understand it, again, from talking to Keith earlier. There are some ironic twists to the way the crackdown has played out. And as I understand it, Keith, at the university, you're seeing people voting with their feet. What's happening in journalism school?
Yeah, I'll tell you that. But by the way, when I was smiling when Glenda was talking, because I mean, who would have thought that Marcos would be a breath of fresh air? So,
yeah,
exactly.
One of those great twists. One of those
great twists of history, right? But amazing. If you live long enough, you start to see weird things. No, you're absolutely right, though. Here in Hong Kong, look, I mean, the erosion of press freedom is real. The rollback of press freedom is shocking, and the perniciousness of the national security law is real. It's so real here that the things that Glenda was saying that supported Rappler having that international support, here in Hong Kong, they could accuse you of foreign collusion if too many foreigners are coming out and supporting you. One of the accusations against Stan News, which is on trial, is they had a London office. Why did they have a London office? What was that office doing here? But it's become so, I'm not making this up. I mean, it's just, it's bad stuff here. But one of the things that's heartening for me is that so many young people are still interested in going into journalism. In September coming in, we will have our largest Master of Journalism class we've ever had. We'll have over 80 students coming in. The vast majority of them are coming from mainland China. They're coming from mainland China to Hong Kong because they can study Western style best practices journalism. They don't want to do propaganda, which is what you'll learn on the mainland. They want to know how to do critical reporting, investigative reporting, video reporting, data, all the things that we can teach. We're doing strong on our undergraduate journalism side so far. And when I talk to young people, we're now undergraduates getting ready to graduate, who graduated in June, et cetera. A lot of them, this group that are here now, don't forget, we have a 4-year undergraduate program. They got inspired to study journalism because of the protest of 2019 and the national security law, because they said they recognize the importance of journalism to a free society. And and that's what's kind of heartening. that they, again, in Hong Kong now, the government from Beijing telling the locals here what to do have basically crushed civil society. They've crushed and neutered the opposition parties. There's nobody left to question government policies except the media. The journalists are the only ones left. They're getting ready to abolish the so-called the district councils here, which are like neighborhood advisory committees. Even having these kind of relatively powerless elected bodies is too much. So they're going to abolish them and make them mostly appointed or be vetted by the Communist Party to make sure they can get these seats on these powerless bodies. The media is the only thing left that can question government, that can speak truth to power, that can stand up at a press conference and say, hey, wait a minute, this is not true, or what you're saying is not accurate. People see the importance of media, so I'm really excited. I hope that we still can keep that in the future years going forward, because as all of you would probably know, journalists in this part of the world are underpaid. And when you're underpaid and under threat, it's going to be hard to keep young people coming into the profession, as we go forward.
Now, look, not surprisingly, we've been a bit ambitious in all of the ground that we hope to cover with this. And so I'll have to ask everyone to try to keep their answers short. But there was another interesting twist there, Keith, and that is it's your view, as I understand it, that the major international media organizations who've long treated Hong Kong as a safe haven, as a hub for regional headquarters, they're sticking it out. You're talking about CNN, BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Is that likely to change anywhere in the near future? And what are the potential triggers that would see them heading to the exits?
It could change because, look, this is still a good regional base. And a lot of people left, individual journalists left during COVID because they couldn't travel. We had a 3-week quarantine and flight bans. And so if you were a regional correspondent, you couldn't travel in and out of Hong Kong. So a lot of people left. A lot of them now are coming back. But, I've had these conversations at the Foreign Correspondents Club bar many a night over the last few years where people have looked around and said, can we stay in Hong Kong? Well, you got to cover Asia. We have to have our regional headquarters. Okay, where would we go? Taiwan? Well, China's rattling the sabers there. Philippines? Oh, well, you got Marcos there. Thailand? Well, you have lèse majesté laws and they're not in great shape either. Singapore? Oh my God, you can't write about Singapore from Singapore. When you look around Southeast Asia, you kind of say there aren't that many good places where you could actually base. So that's why you've got, CNN has about 50 people here, approximately. AFP has 150. Bloomberg probably has 200 people here. So it's not that easy to move people to another place. So I think they're going to stick it around for now. They're going to make sure that they keep their back office operations, their computer operations, maybe somewhere offshore. Seoul seems to have emerged as a place. And they're going to be keeping an eye to see if, as they have to rotate people through here, if they start having visa issues, if they start weaponizing the visa process as they do in mainland China. That's going to make people alert. And one last thing, I don't want to hold it up, is they're now trying to go to court. The government has gone to court trying to ban a song. It was a protest song during 2019. The government's trying to ban it. And the reason they want to ban the song is they want to force YouTube and Google and all the other internet sites to take it down. So when they start banning websites, journalists can't access the things they need. That's when you might see people starting to look around.
Moving out. Now, look, I'm going to have to sort of raise her head and skip a couple of things, but I did want to get to issues about the challenge of business models. And at this point, I thought it'd be good to bring in Glenda. You've obviously had to sort of struggle over the last decade to create a viable media business. And, the old days of relying on the deep pockets of advertisers is no longer is no longer going to work. Is a sort of subscriber advertising sponsorship philosophy model sustainable for an organization like Rappler? How do you keep an organization like Rappler alive and committed to good quality journalism? Because we all know good journalism costs a fair bit of money. Investigations aren't cheap. You've got to send somebody off for a couple of weeks on their own, and that's all they might do, one story. So how do you do it?
Yeah, I think what we've learned is not to rely on one revenue stream, especially within the Philippine context. So because Rappler is free, we do not foresee ourselves paywalling content, not in the near future anyway. But we have, for one, we rely on advertising, but we know that that is a dying business model. We also rely on membership. It is not paywalling content, but really offering events and exclusive briefings to Rappler members, and they are paying members. Number three, we also rely on grants and crowdfunding, especially for our investigative reports. I think journalism, what technology has done to journalism makes us realize one thing, which is really journalism cannot do it alone. It has to be very connected with the communities it serves, and it has to also try to inspire good citizenship so that there's a sort of public support for journalism. And that is what we want to promote and expand. We also have a commercial research arm that really does a lot of social analysis, social media analysis for commercial clients. So in short, Dawn, it's really a diversified revenue stream. There cannot be just one go-to as the main vehicle for media. Having said that, do we see a business model moving forward that is sustainable? No. We are trying to study the landscape is changing fast. You have AI, technology has gobbled up our audiences and everything else, and they're monetizing on their own. So we're trying to study it, but in the meantime, we're diversifying revenue stream.
So are you fundamentally concerned that the dynamics of the current media environment just don't support the production of serious journalism with the time, effort, and expertise that has to go into that?
I used to be very cynical towards that and probably would agree with that, except that in the last couple of years, what we've seen on the back end are the traffic goes to long form journalism. When we thought or investigative reports would probably not gain traffic, but our traffic drivers are the most compelling investigative reporting that we have. That inspires us. That tells us what? There is a community of readers that will not probably just read, but probably pay for it. But are we asking them to pay? No, we're asking grant institutions, we're asking the wealthy with conscience to pay for journalism, because journalism is a public interest endeavor. So while there have always been temptations to TikTok your way through journalism, there is enough basis for us to believe that there is readership for serious journalism in the Philippines.
Now, I would have liked to have spent more time on this business issue, but I think we have to skip ahead. And one of the critical issues that I outlined in the introduction was this matter of credibility and trust, and the survey showing that across the board, people are losing trust in what they see. What can be done to reverse that? And maybe I can flip that back to Keith to start with, and then come back to everybody else to give me their take on how big a challenge it is, this issue of declining trust and credibility, and how do you reverse it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Don. I'm afraid we can't answer it in a few moments we have in this panel, but it's a long-term thing. And look, it's trust in all institutions has collapsed, not just media. Trust in government has collapsed. Trust in political parties have collapsed. Trust in religion and established churches has collapsed. People believe conspiracy theories, and people can go on the internet and find anything to support any belief they want. I think it was really heartening to hear what Glenda was just saying, and I think it's true. Deep researched investigative reporting, that exposes corruption or just shines a light on social issues and problems is the way you gain the trust back. And just keep your head down, doing your job, reporting. And again, I think a lot of journalists we have to break out of this mindset of just covering every little day-to-day, or this politician said that's a story, etc. Deeply reported stories are what people are looking for, and factual stories. Journalists need to really kind of remember the old-fashioned thing: arm yourself with facts, surround yourself with facts. But deeply reported, richly reported stories will do a lot better than the kind of little snippets that I think we've gotten used to in the internet age, which this politician said something, that's a headline. That politician responded to what he said, that's another headline. That's not informing the public of anything, but really, and I think again, and we can't get into the whole topic now, but AI has the potential to do a lot of this kind of daily stock market reporting, sports reporting, to allow journalists to get out and do what journalists really want to do, which is deeply reported stories that take a lot more time, investigative pieces.
And look, there's been a plethora of new organisations that have started up within individual countries. The UK now has BBC Verify. There's an anti-hoax community set up in Indonesia. The Philippines has Facts First PH, doesn't it, Gloria? Leah, can I bring you in on this? And I know it's not sort of mainstream for the Committee for Protecting Journalists, but it is relevant to what you do. How important is a robust fact-checking apparatus to support what media are doing, either as a consortium or as individual operations within media organisations?
Yeah, so I think certainly they're very important, because I think one of the main challenge to journalism, press freedom, and media safety right now is in terms of disinformation. And disinformation poses that sort of threat to not just journalism, but also our society, our democracy. So any sort of initiative like that will help in terms of help contributes to its media safety and the ability of journalists to do their jobs. And of course, I think when it comes to talking about trust and fact-checking and disinformation, a lot of this are deliberate attacks by public figures, by politicians, and this sort of attacks are designed to undermine media outlets, designed to harm the reputations of journalists. And we're seeing a lot of this threats and attacks are also facilitated on social media right now. So, definitely we see social media tech platforms have this sort of role to help ensure that journalists can do their work and, really clamp down on disinformation.
Okay, and then look, just finally, I'll try to quickly get to our promise to discuss AI, but by its very nature, it's speculative. We really don't know what's going to happen. All that is you get a sense of something big is on the way. But when it comes to the practice of journalism, you can already see the risk of it leading to significant redundancies in journalism. As Keith said, doing basic stock reports, you don't need a reporter, or a machine might do it for you. Ultimately, is it going to empower journalists by being a valuable research tool, or a danger in terms of producing hard to generate fakes? And if I can go to you on that, Keith, to start with, and maybe then go to Gloria.
Yeah, it's like everything.
Glenda, sorry. Yeah, you go, Keith. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, me. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's like everything else. It's like with the advent of the internet. It both presented us with great opportunities to expand our research. You got all this research now at your fingertips that used to take you weeks to do, but at the same time, it also allowed the fake news to kind of proliferate. And I think AI is going to be the same. There are tremendously good opportunities for journalists to use AI to their advantage. I mean, you could actually, I've seen this done. You could use AI to come up with a list of questions that you should ask. AI can comb through a huge ream of documents that might take a reporter days to read, to comb through. So, there are really real advantages to if journalists can partner with AI to do some of the mundane work of journalism, to free the journalists to do things that AI can't do. AI can't go to a parking garage and interview somebody and get a scoop and come back and write it. AI can't go have a cup of coffee with a diplomat and find out some information. AI is only as good as the documentation that's already there in the internet. But as you mentioned, yeah, the deep fakes are going to become deeper and more fake, and it's going to be a lot trickier to kind of ascertain truth from fiction. So I think it's, again, as you mentioned in the beginning, Don, it's a double-edged sword. It's going to be both. But I think journalists shouldn't be afraid of it and run from it. They should learn how to harness this technology to make their jobs better and to make their reporting more in depth.
And Glenda, do you want to say something on that? Like, just keep it brief.
I think we have the lesson from the harms done by social media in the past. And what lesson is that? Is that we need to craft certain policies moving forward to govern AI practice. Because we saw, social media before as the be all and end all of democracy, and look where we are. So there's that. I think part of it is we use what we have but there's got to be stakeholder activity here involving the media, big business, technology platforms, AI companies coming together to agree on governing rules, because there's got to be some governing rules somewhere.
Okay, and Leah, the final question goes to you. And I know that the Committee for Protect Journalists, like others, are sort of grappling with this and giving a bit of general thought to it. But and hopefully this is something that sort of is within your purview. But you know, the threat of AI empowering authoritarian governments, increasing surveillance, endangering sources and perhaps whistleblowers. How big a worry is that for the protection of journalists, the safety of journalists, but most importantly as well, the safety of their sources?
Yeah, I think we definitely, for us as CPJ, our concern is with, what's the impact of AI on press freedom and media safety. So I think, but when we talk about AI, also I think we need to give it a bit more nuance. I think if AI is leveraged for the use of like disinformation or harmful use, then it should be a concern for all of us, because definitely disinformation poses that sort of challenge to journalism, to the ability of journalists to do their work and our society. And AI companies have the responsibility to make sure that their technology are not used to facilitate those attacks on press freedom.
Okay, and look, we've got a couple of questions coming in and a little bit of time to address them. So I'll just quickly run through the questions. There's a question here regarding Myanmar, Afghanistan, and it poses the dilemma of reporters, media houses not being able to operate effectively on the ground. If I'm reading this correctly, is that what does that mean for the coverage for the sector? How do you deal with those sorts of restrictions on a hot subject, a hot topic like Myanmar? And maybe you want to have a crack at that, Leah, or I'm happy to defer to others.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, we're seeing an increased number of journalists who go into exile. In CPJ, we just actually released. We did an analysis this week in conjunction with World Refugee Days, and we saw a spike of over 220% in our program to help journalists who go into exile over the last 3 years. And that was one of the key drivers of that is, of course, journalists in Afghanistan who had to go into exile after the 4th of Kabul. But also a large part of that is in Myanmar, where journalists have to leave after the coup. Of course, I think in our concern at CPJ is that a lot of these journalists are right now stranded in countries, in neighboring countries like Iran, Pakistan for journalists and for Afghan journalists, and without the sort of safe, viable pathway to resettlement to a safe third country, and their ability to continue the journalism in this new country. But also at the same time, we see interesting models that have come up in terms of journalism, the sort of collaborative journalism, where there is collaborations between journalists who remain in Afghanistan, working with journalists who have gone into exile in places like the UK and US, and report what is going on in Afghanistan. But of course, I think journalists who are able to continue report is a very small number, and also, it's a sort of privilege, but also they have to overcome a lot of challenges, including like surveillance and, the safety of their sources and their family who back in Afghanistan. But also for Hong Kong, for instance, we're seeing a number of journalists who had to leave the city right now, setting up new outlets in countries like the UK, in places like Taiwan, Australia, and continue reporting. So I think it's vital for us to ensure, that they are able to continue to report, even though they had to leave the country.
And Keith, there's one for you here, I think. How do we provide more support for independent journalism free of funding constraints?
Yeah, subscribe to an outlet or become a member of Rappler, and sign up for these outlets.
Sign up for Rappler.
Sign up for Rappler today. Sign up for Malaysia Kini. Sign up for all of these Myanmar sites. They need eyeballs. They need money. If they're crowdsourced, go in and toss them some money. If they're membership organizations, join as a member. Information wants to be free, but journalists need to be paid. And that's the problem. So, if you're getting all your information about what's happening in Asia for free, then you're not helping, so these journalists need money. So that's one thing, and again, I go back to what Lee was just saying, China kicked out a huge number of journalists, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, but they were still able to report what was going on in China, even during the pandemic by using satellite imagery, by calling in, by using all the technological means available now. In Myanmar, you've got journalists on the outside, but you've also got citizen journalists on the inside. So anybody with a cell phone now is helping out, and they're sending this stuff out. So we're actually getting really good reporting on what's going on there. So no, it's really changing how, journalists being exiled outside the country is really changing how news is reported.
And Glenda, the last word goes to you. How does the international community go about supporting Rappler? What does that support look like? How can the international community continue to support independent Asian media as it faces future challenges? So what are you expecting, Glenda, from the international community to keep Rappler going?
Two forms, and not just for Rappler, I think for all media under siege. One is international statements from the international community, statements of support. In the case of Jimmy, she also has that support, and that's very important, especially as an added pressure on governments that are harassing journalists. That's one. But secondly, really supporting financially, commercially, institutions that help independent newsrooms. When when we do crowdfunding, supporting complex investigative stories that are collaborative in nature. We have been intending to collaborate, for example, with a lot of media organizations outside the Philippines, even as far as in Myanmar, in Thailand. And when you support this complex investigative pieces, then that means that we are able to cover also stories that resonate with the community, because it's not just stories that we believe are stories, but it should be stories that we know are relevant to the communities and will help improve their lives. So it's really both public statements, but yes, put your money where your mouth is. Support not individual journalists, but the kind of stories, and more than the stories, one more is really support newsrooms who are trying to craft a sustainable business model forward. And therefore, you don't just support stories, but you support projects that in the end will be sustainable.
Terrific. Well, look, thank you, everybody. There were a couple more questions in the Q&A box, but thanks, Keith, for taking the time to provide answers in the chat. Saves us time. So look, thank you all very much. A fascinating discussion. I hope our audience found it that way. And I will now turn over to Jenny to, I think, do the final statements.
Yeah, thank you very much, Don. And also thank you very much to all the speakers and our participants who stayed with us for an hour today. The full recording of this webinar will be available online shortly through our Asialink website and also on our YouTube channel. Also, please stay tuned to our coming webinar. We have a lot coming in July. We'll be also discussing Australia-Indonesia relations, ASEAN-China relations. And until then, thank you all once again, and we wish you a lovely evening.
Thanks, everybody. All the best.
Thank you.
See ya.